Good evening.
Hey, Vicky. Hey, Casey.
Hey there.
I see that Commissioner Lazzaretti, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I do realize that it is 6:30, but at this time, we only have 3 commissioners present. We need one more for a quorum, so I will wait a few minutes to see if we can get another commissioner to log on. Thank you for your patience. Well, good evening, everyone. It is 6:33, and I do see that Commissioner Tualu has joined us. So I will be calling our meeting of the West Contra Costa Unified School District Independent Redistricting Commission to order. Item 2 is roll call. And Ms. Forrest, will you take the roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Butler. Commissioner Diaz-Noriega. Commissioner Tualu.
Present.
Commissioner Hilliard.
Present.
Commissioner Gordon.
Present.
Commissioner Lazzaretti.
Present.
That constitutes a quorum, so we can proceed with our meeting. Item 3 is on our agenda is approval of the agenda, tonight's agenda. Are there any questions, concerns, or changes this evening? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the agenda.
I second that motion.
I have a motion from Commissioner Lazzaretti and a second from Commissioner Hilliard. All in favor? Whoops, old ways. We're teleconferencing, so we need to take a roll call vote. Ms. Forrest?
Commissioner Butler, absent. Commissioner Diaz-Noriega. Commissioner Tolu,
Yes.
Commissioner Hilliard,
Yes.
Commissioner Chair Gordon,
Yes.
Commissioner Lazzaretti.
Yes.
Motion passes. Moving on to item 4, our approval of the November 23rd, 2021 minutes. Are there questions, amendments? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes.
I second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Lazzaretti and a second from Commissioner Toulouse. Roll call vote. Ms. Forrest?
Commissioner Butler, absent. Commissioner Diaz-Noriega, absent. Commissioner Tolu,
Yes.
Commissioner Hilliard,
Yes.
Commissioner Chair Gordon,
Yes.
Commissioner Lazzaretti.
Yes.
Moving on to item 5, that passes as well. Moving on to item 5, our public comment. This is the time where we allow 3 minutes for public comment on items not already on our agenda. We do ask that you keep it under our jurisdiction, which is very narrow and limited. So is there public comment on items that are not on our agenda this evening?
No, sorry, no public comment at this time.
No public comment? Well, moving on to item 6 is our discussion and possible action items. Item A is discussion and possible adoption of the resolution regarding continuing to meet via video conferencing and teleconferencing. This is something that we have to do every month. And if you would like, Mr. Pitts can again inform us of the resolution that we need to approve in order to continue teleconferencing and Zooming.
Certainly. So as we discussed last time, the legislature has allowed the continued use of teleconference and Zoom meetings under certain conditions for so long as there is a state of emergency in place. But that requires certain findings by the commission, and it requires that the commission revisit those findings every 30 days or no less frequently than every 30 days. So I have sent to commissioners and posted on the website a proposed resolution number 2021-02 that would note the findings that were made previously in the prior resolution that was adopted at the beginning of November, and note that the commission has reconsidered the circumstances of the state of emergency, and that in the interest of interest of public health and safety, the commission intends to continue invoking the provisions of government code permitting teleconferencing for an additional 30 days.
Thank you. Questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, is there public comment on this item? Seeing none. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Forrest. Seeing no public comment on this, it is an action item. I will entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the resolution to extend our remote hearing capabilities by another 30 days.
I have a motion from Commissioner Hilliard. Is there a second?
I second.
I have a second from Commissioner Lazzaretti.
just for clarity, would be the specific motion be to adopt the draft resolution number 2021-02?
Okay, yes, thank you. Thanks for clarifying.
Are there questions or comments from board members commissioners at this time?
Actually, I have one question. I'm looking over the draft resolution now, and the first paragraph states that last line of the first paragraph, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the fifth line says through December 9, 2021. And is that the correct date, or would we be hopefully moving this out 30 days to like January?
That is, that is the wrong date. And so the date on this, as set forth in the effective date, section 5, would be, it would be take effect immediately upon its adoption and be effective until the early of January 6th, 2022, or such time as the commission adopts a subsequent resolution. So I do think you're right that the intent was to have the resolution adopted in effect from today's date through January 6th, 2022. If the commission were to perhaps consider adopting a motion that would adopt resolution 2021-02 as modified to reflect an effective date from today through January 6th, 2022, that might solve the issue.
So the motion was moved by Commissioner Lazzaretti, Commissioner Hilliard.
Right.
So would you modify your motion?
Oh, yes. My motion is that we move to approve the resolution as stated in section 5 of resolution number 2021-02 to extend our remote hearings until January 6, 2022.
Thank you. And is there a second on the modified motion?
Second.
I have a second from Commissioner Lazzaretti. Is there public comment at this time on this item?
No public comment at this time.
Seeing none, it is a roll call vote again. Ms. Forrest?
Commissioner Butler, absent. Commissioner Diaz-Noriega, absent. Commissioner Tolu,
Yes.
Commissioner Hilliard,
Yes.
Commissioner Gordon,
Yes.
Commissioner Lazzaretti.
Yes.
Passes unanimously with the board, the commissioners that are here. Moving on to item B, this is our public outreach and solicitation to the public for public comment. Just to let you all know, we are at Kennedy High. Are there any public comment, or are there any public people at Kennedy High this evening?
Yes, we do have one guest.
Wonderful. Did they introduce themselves? I thought I heard a voice. Well, welcome.
Sure. My name is Chris Mastrell. I'm a parent of a child at Mayor Vista Elementary School, two kids there.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I do also have a attendee with a hand up. I'm going to first read some information about the commission and why we're here this evening. And I'd like to say welcome to you all. I'm Commissioner Gordon. I'm the chair of the Redistricting Commission. I'm a lifelong educator teacher with 15 years on the K-12 school board and 8 years on the community college district governing board. I'm one of the county-wide commissioners along with Commissioner Craig Lazzaretti, and we both live in Martinez. The commission has been charged with developing a map that will identify the 5 trustee areas used for the West Contra Costa Unified School District trustee elections from 2022 through 2030. All members that are on our commission have applied to serve and were selected from applicants by retired United States District Court Judge Thelton Henderson. And at this time, I just want to add a heartfelt thank you and gratitude to the volunteers who have been attending these meetings for the past 9 months. It's been a challenge at times, and I truly admire the commitment and level of professionalism from my fellow commissioners. We have worked hard on retaining legal counsel and a professional demographer to advise the commission on the process of developing new trust area maps. We have established the plan for outreach. Tonight is one of those nights. It is the 5th of the 5 public outreach meetings that will take place before the commission adopts a preliminary plan. The commission has held 1 meeting in each of the 5 trustee areas. The last 4 meetings occurred over the last few weeks in Pinole Valley, El Cerrito, Richmond, and Contra Costa College. Tonight's meeting is at Kennedy High, and we again thank you for participating and for the public being there. We appreciate that, and for the public that are attending via Zoom. We will be adopting our preliminary plan on December 14th. So 1 week from tonight, we will be looking at that, our maps, and we will be getting last input for it. And we will be adopting some preliminary plans on that date. Then 3 additional public hearings prior to the adoption of the recommended plan on January 25th will be held, and the adoption of the final districting plan will be on February 15th, 2022, following another public hearing on recommended plan before the West Contra Costa Unified School Board of Education. The key to ensuring that the map represents the best interest of all of our district and residents has been the topmost priority for the commissioner, our trusted and very steadfast and competent lawyer, Casey Pitts, and demographer, Dr. Lauren Collingwood, and his assistant, Sean Long. The process for developing the map and information needed for the community mirrors is now I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Collingwood, where he will walk us through the presentation of our preliminary options, and we will have public input at this time. Thank you, Dr. Collingwood.
Thank you. I'm going to present a little bit on what's new. In part to follow up with what I was working on last time for the public and for the commissioners. So I have a short bit on compactness and racially polarized voting. And so that will be the kind of presentation focus today. But for those who are watching or there in the audience, you can go to my website. Let me just put it in the chat. That is a website built specifically for this. And there you can find some information. So I'll start my presentation with that.
Before we start your presentation, I just want to ask with public input from Scott Rafferty, is this something that needs to be dealt with immediately, or can it wait for after the presentation, Scott?
I was anticipating after the presentation.
Very well.
I'll work on the echo. I'll figure if I can.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Back to you, Dr. Collingwood.
All right. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully I get this correct. Holler at me if I get this wrong. So if you have a hard time seeing anything. So can you see like my bars and stuff, my Zoom bars, or can you only see the web page?
We can see your Zoom bars. We can see
Okay.
what
All right.
tabs you have open, in fact.
There you go. So here is the website, and each map here, proposed map, is kind of what we're working with and making some small adjustments as we move forward. And so, for example, if you click on map 2, there's the outline of the plan that has demographic information. There are shape files that are available. There's an Excel file of demographic change in the districts in the 5 trustee seats from 2010 to 2020, and then a projection based on publicly available information. And then there's a compactness report, which has been added since last week. And I'm going to review that briefly. The main finding with the compactness report is all of the plans fall within sort of normal compactness measures. And so I'll get to that in a second. So today I'm going to review a little bit of this compactness, talk about some of the measures, how I see that affecting the 4 plans proposed, and then I'll review 2 racially polarized voting analyses. In the 2020 single member districts, there were 4 of the 5 seats had elections, or at least contested elections. And then 2018, there's something like 10 or 11 candidates. And then 3 candidates are selected, the top 3 vote getters. There is racially polarized voting in these jurisdictions, although what I often see in places like the Bay Area is that it's not as clear cut as what you may see in other jurisdictions. But I do a lot of racially polarized voting, and it's clear to me that that is in operation. So that's good in the sense that this is one reason what we're called here to do is to make sure that we follow Voting Rights Act and CVRA restrictions. And so this kind of falls within that wheelhouse. So one reason we look at compactness is due to this ever-present gerrymander possibility. This is based on the, I think, Massachusetts congressional district, and I can't remember exactly when, a long time ago, but this was a district that was put together. And so this would have a very, very low compactness score. And so there's 3 measures that I look at that are pretty standard: the Rioch measure, Polsby-Popper measure, and the convex hull. I personally like the convex hull. It's the idea here where you are, you put like a rubber band around the district, and then you measure the percentage of that rubber band area that is that the district is within, if that makes sense. So as you can see here, and I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit more quickly, each district here produces one of these measures. If you focus over here, these are all pretty solid scores. Nothing is kind of going under the kind of set guided people who do a lot of redistricting work, a lot of well-known political scientists in this area. None of the numbers are triggering extremely low compactness scores. I would suggest, a quantitatively suggest some sort of extreme gerrymander. And you can see they're, fairly similar across the board. Again, looking down here. And over here, things change a little bit because we've moved some of the districts around a little bit, but again, the numbers are looking okay. And same thing with Plan 4. So these are available for anyone to go and look at, make an assessment on compactness. But from my assessment, there's nothing too much to be concerned about there, even though the shape of some of the districts look a little maybe less compact, but part of the reason is because a lot of them are capturing a lot of area that no one really lives in, and that often, produces those kinds of effects. But this falls well within the kind of norms of what we tend to see in American politics. And then moving to the racially polarized voting analysis, there were in the 2020 election, I'm looking at 4 different areas here, and I just highlighted in circles some evidence of some racially polarized voting. And so with a particular focus on racially polarized voting between Black and Latino or Latinx and white Anglo, there's fewer candidates, at least to our knowledge, that are Asian, and so that's a little bit tougher to assess. But getting to area 1, we can see that Black voters, based on our racially polarized voting assessments, along with both white and Asian voters in area 1, are backing the Black candidate, whereas Latino voters, although narrowly, are backing the Latino candidate. So this is a very narrow, racially polarized voting context. And it would be the kind of thing that, 4 points, it's not huge, but technically that falls within the racially polarized voting framework, but it's very narrow racially polarized voting in that context because the gap is not that high. You're looking at kind of 50, anything above or below 50 is kind of evidence of it. 51 way, 51 one way, 51 another way, at least based on kind of the academic literature. Then area 2, we're seeing here again, Latino voters are preferring the Latino or Latinx candidate there quite overwhelmingly. And this time, however, the Asian vote in this district, although there's not as large of an Asian population there, of course, is siding disproportionately with the Latino candidate. Although a majority of Asian voters, according to this analysis, are collectively going for the two black candidates. But what's very clear here is that the Black vote is clearly going for the Black winner, Christian, but also a sizable portion of that vote is also going to the second Black candidate, Williams. Moving into area 4, we again see some polarized voting between Latinos and Blacks, but this time the white vote is tending towards Gonzalez Oy as opposed to Burrell. So Gonzalez Oy is winning that seat quite handily. And what's also interesting here is this white vote is not attracted to, in this case, the white candidate, Rec there. That finding is overturned somewhat, though, in area 5, where we see a Black candidate, Weisinger, running against 2 white candidates, and combine the 2 white candidates, the white vote is backing those 2 candidates overwhelming relative to Weisinger, whereas the Black voters in this district are backing the Black candidate. But keep in mind that these numbers are can be, you're going to have a little bit more confidence in them in areas where there's a larger geographic representation of that particular group. But overall, the conclusion is there's a lot of crossover voting in this area, okay? And so that's a kind of a small d democratic good thing, of course, right? But there's also evidence of racially polarized voting, but this is not the kind of extreme racially polarized voting that I tend to see, say, if I'm working in the South or if I'm working in Native American territory, for example, where it's much more extreme. So that's 2020. And then 2018 is a little bit harder because it's kind of a shotgun election where it's a top 3. And so what I did is we looked at the overall vote getter, the overall votes, and then the most preferred candidate for the different 4 main racial groups here. You can see that in those columns off to the right. And so the white voters are disproportionately favoring the white candidate Cronenberg. The Black voters are disproportionately favoring the Black candidate Callaway, and Latino voters are disproportionately favoring the ultimate single highest vote getter, Hernandez Jarvis. And then the Asian voting population is also backing that candidate. So there's a possibility, of course, that possibly the race or ethnicity of the candidates, maybe I got potentially off as somebody who doesn't live there. Somebody could be Filipino or something like that, right? And not Hispanic. We checked, we have a sort of a methodology for doing this. We've written papers where we go in and we classify the race and ethnicity of different candidates, but of course it's not always perfect, right? And also racial identity in American life and politics is a very personal thing as well. So but just wanted to note that. So these are some of the new bits of information that we're bringing. So again, we have kind of some general trade-offs between the different maps. But the compactness is something that matters, but is not something that's going to kind of seal the day. I think, given these various alternatives, I think we're okay with any of them. Given that there's racially polarized voting, I do think that at least some evidence of it, we need to make sure that we, take into account the kind of demographics, for sure, of the different maps. And so I'm going to stop there just for now, because these are some of the new things that I have, and I'm still working on some of the other minor tweaks in terms of producing some other reports that I'll have over to you guys pretty soon.
Well, thank you, Dr. Collingwood. I do have one question, and then I will open it up for other questions for commissioners. Can you go back to the second to the last slide?
Yeah, hang on. Sorry, I actually accidentally closed it out.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
The one candidate,
I got it open now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Callaway, that you identified race as Black. Is there a
Yeah.
first name with Callaway?
Yeah, hang on. Let me just stop my share on that while I was looking at the results. Vanessa. Yeah, Vanessa Anitra Callaway.
Okay. I was just checking. We had a board member that was Genevieve Callaway, and she was Latina. So I was just making sure that we didn't get our wires crossed. Are there
Yeah,
questions?
it's always possible that happens, and it's kind of embarrassing when it does. It's kind of funny because I have a lot. We do a lot of this with our students too, and we do a lot of like local level candidate race evaluation, and sometimes it's almost impossible to know, but unless you know those people personally. But yeah, that's the person's name.
Exactly. Well, thank you. Questions or comments from commissioners before I open it up to public comment? Seeing no commissioner questions or comments, we can open it up to the public. If you are on Zoom, please raise your hand. If you are at Kennedy High, if you would like to speak at this time, you just have to let Ms. Forrest know that you would like to make a comment. And I do have a hand raised from Mr. Rafferty. Okay. Mr. Rafferty.
Good evening. So I have some, I had a few detailed comments about District 3, but essentially I think maps 3 and 4, which are identical in that district, are preferable to 1 and 2. And I can go over some of the details, but I do want to take some exception to the racially polarized voting analysis. At the remedial phase, that's generally relevant in determining whether a Latino district can be effective without a coalition with Black voters. And I don't think that's an issue here because the direction has been, I think, clearly to try, even where that's the case, to try to create a distinctive Latino district and as close to a majority Black district as possible. And I think that's the right choice. But I want to make clear that there was racially polarized voting studies with a very different methodology, Latino versus non-Latino, which is the impact is diluted because Latinos are often in coalition with Blacks. But there were precinct regressions up the wazoo, and I personally sponsored them in court. And frankly, the district was unwilling to even produce evidence. And then in both Richmond, which I'm very familiar with, and West County Wastewater District, there were similarly dramatic findings. And one of the principles of the California Voting Rights Act is that once you file a lawsuit, the subsequent elections are less relevant. That's because either people vote strategically. In this county, when you say, gee, there's racially polarized voting, we're not electing enough Latinos, white people all of a sudden wake up and say, yeah, that's right. And that is discounted. But what is, I believe, inadmissible is to look, well, logically inadmissible is to look at an election after districting has taken place, because there's been a remedy, and there's a Latino district, and at that point, a lot of people say, yeah, we should have a Latino candidate here. So I'm puzzled at the relevance of that, and I do want to defend the strength of the essentially the uncontested findings of racially polarized voting from 2016 and before, which is what was presented to. But in any event, I do want to just make a couple comments about the changes. And I don't know if I can project my screen or not, but I'll just talk through it. So the 3-4 district is a little less strong than the one in map version 2, but I think it is, especially if there are a couple tinkerings to it, more compelling. There's an area, it does in the northeast part, there are 2 changes, one to go across the freeway, which is not really a large number of people. And I just wanted to question that. It's about 44% CVAP, and it's 336 people. Also there's Contra Costa College, which is very low Latino CVAP, and it's less than 10%, and it's 185 people. These were, it doesn't make it look more compact, the college, but it's a very different demographic. More critically, in the southeast corner, there's a place, and I'm not sure I have all the street names, but there's kind of a jutting out, and 3 and 4 makes a square corner. I think is it down by Roosevelt Avenue? Let me see if I can get the street name. It's the area below Grant and 23rd Street, south of Grant, east of 23rd Street. I think that should be cut out on compactness grounds, and 3 and 4 do that. You might consider extending eastward from 24th to 26th to make up some population. That's a 55% CVAP, and it's about 750 people, and it's just as compact. Where this plan kind of loses strength, and I think we do need to target 54%-ish Latino, given the turnout status now, is in Atkinson Village, which is to the southwest. That's only 38% Latino CVAP, but it is 3,700 people. So that can't really be changed without going back into North Richmond, which might be appropriate. But I think that it's a good design overall. I'd look at those changes, especially cutting out the area south of Grant and east of 23rd Street. And I'm happy to talk to Lauren about it offline. But I think we're really moving in the right direction. I'm pleasantly, I won't say surprised, but when we did this 3 years ago, it was really hunt and peck to get to 50%. And we knew that the Latino community needed more than that. but the demographics have changed, or they haven't changed. They've just been, the new census has reported them more up to date. And I think this is going to be a very functional district.
Oh,
And
thank you.
and I hope that it's sequenced for 2022, but we probably haven't gotten to that point yet. So it's great work. I really admire the work that Dr. Collingwood has done, and those would be my recommendations.
Thank you for wrapping up.
Glad
We
we've come
do
this
have,
far.
thank you for wrapping that up. We do have a 3-minute time limit. We let it go a little long there because we do have very few people in the audience tonight. So, but again, Mr. Rafferty, if you would like to, please do write you down what you have just shared with us all, and you can submit that to the commission and Mr. Pitts and Dr. Collingwood, and we'll be happy to take that input via email as well. Is there anybody else willing to comment at this time, either at Kennedy High or here on Zoom chat?
Yes, we have a guest here at Kennedy who would like to have comments.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Collingwood, for the presentation, for the analysis. I had one clarification question, then maybe dig in. Is the essence of racial polarization analysis to look for difference in the spread, or to look for cases in which one race votes for one candidate and the other race votes for the other candidate? So is it the margin that matters, or is it the majority vote in each direction that matters?
That's a great question. The technical definition would be like if 52%, or if I estimated that 52% of the Latino voters prefer candidate A and 52% of white voters preferred candidate B, that would technically be racially polarized voting.
Okay, great.
Another situation could be this, like Latino voters back candidate A 60% and white voters back candidate A 80%, and there's a gap of 20 points. That's not racially polarized voting. So it really does get around that 50% mark.
Okay, great. So that's perfect. Thank you for the clarification. So I wanted to ask a little bit about your interpretations of some of the data then. Would you mind pulling your presentation back up if it's readily available?
Yeah, hold on one second.
I can start talking while you do, because I took a few notes. So in the first example you showed us, you showed that the Hispanic vote, I think if I'm remembering correctly, voted for the Hispanic candidate 52% versus the Black vote for 40. Yeah, that's exactly perfect. So
Yeah.
a 48-52 split along racial lines. And you characterize that as being, yeah, well, it's pretty close, but there is a little bit of a difference. But then the second example, you see the same 52-48 split in the Latino vote, only there are 2 Black candidates now. It's 52 to 24 to 24. But you characterize that as like overwhelmingly the Latinos voted for the Latino, but it's the same split as we saw in the first vote. Do you see what I'm saying? Like in the first one?
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, it's a matter of interpretation, because they're splitting their vote somewhat evenly among the 2 Black candidates. So it's kind of a matter of interpretation there. To me, when I see a jump like that relative to these 2 others, you're still seeing this like strong preference. And so, for example, we might see a situation where, like, take area 5, where you have, if you're just looking at the Latino vote, they're kind of split a bunch of different ways, but you're still kind of focusing on the kind of key winner. So for me, I look at the overall kind of top vote getter, and then I drop down from that, because I don't know for sure that I can just put 24 plus 24 together to make 48. It's because if one of those candidates went away, some of that 24 would go up to that 52, if you know what I'm saying. And so I don't really know what that is. And so that's why, for me, that's more noticeable racially polarized voting. But I think your point's a totally good one, and that's something to, incorporate in, additional information into the analysis. But
it seems like you have multiple candidates that are the same race that you might be able to do that. And you had a second example where I think it was on the next page maybe, where it looked like the white vote went one way, and it did. It was over, or maybe it was the last example. There was, I think it was it was not, excuse me. Yeah, so the bottom one there, you've got two white candidates, and white voters overwhelmingly voted for the white candidates. And then you characterized it as the black voters overwhelmingly voting for the black candidate, but that's not exactly.
They're not overwhelmingly, but they're still prioritizing their top vote choice.
Well, no,
Among,
but aren't the numbers, if I'm reading them correctly, there's 25% for the one and 31% for the other? So the majority of black voters actually voted for white candidates over the black candidate. Is that not true? And that would fall into your second example, in which you had 80% voting one way and 60% voting the same way. So you had a 20% gap, but they're both voting in the same direction, and so it doesn't matter. So I'm calling your interpretations of it is all I'm saying.
yeah, I mean, to me, I'm looking at the top candidate in all these elections. That's why they're bolded. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm looking at the top vote getter. And number two, in area 5, you also have to be somewhat conscious of the fact that area 5, that's the one down south. That is, I think, I can pull it up. Hang on. So part of the issue there, and I didn't go into this too much, but these are going to have somewhat high confidence intervals around those estimates, because area 5 is overwhelmingly white in terms of the CVAP. It's something like 60% or 58% or something like that, you know, and the black CVAP is significantly lower. And so when you're looking at those numbers, you can't as someone in the audience, you can't tell, but you have to interpret that somewhat as some caution. But for me, I'm focusing on, in a lot of contexts, like who would have won, right? Who would have won among that group if they ran, because there's 3 candidates. But
Well, thank you for the clarification, Dr. Collingwood. We do have a 3-minute time limit. Are there any other comments from the public at this time? If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to the commissioners, to our lawyer, Mr. Casey Pitts, and our demographer, Dr. Lauren Collingwood. The information can be found on our website on the West Contra Costa Unified School District under the About Us, and we're down at the bottom, redistricting. So please feel free to reach out with any questions, comments, concerns, and let us know what you're thinking. So we appreciate the participation this evening.
Could I actually ask a quick favor of the member of the public that's at Kennedy High School? Just if you're comfortable for the sake of our records, could you provide your name again so that I can put that in the minutes?
My name is Chris Nasrallah.
Okay, could you spell that? Sorry.
CHRS.
Okay.
N is November, A is in Alpha, S is in Sierra, R is in Romeo, Alpha, Lima, Lima, Alpha, Hotel.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you again. Ms. Forrest, are there any other public comment on this public input item this evening?
No more public comment at this time.
Is there any more public comment from our Zoom attendees? And I'm seeing no more hands raising up. So that ends our public input part of our agenda. Thank you all. That moves us on to item 7 on our agenda, our commissioner reports, updates, future agenda items. I'll start with Commissioner Toulouse.
None.
Thank you. Commissioner Hilliard.
None at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lazzaretti.
I was hoping to ask make a couple observations on Dr. Collingwood's presentation after hearing the public comment and the clarifications. Is it all right if I do that, or will we pass that point?
No, that's I think under the agenda item, you can add some comments.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I was just wanted to wait till after the public comment was finished.
We can put it down as one of your reports, so
Okay.
feel free.
Just a couple, just a quick observation and a question for you, Dr. Collingwood. On the racially polarized voting, the data is interesting, but I think the caveat or the concern I have is I think in this, I didn't follow the last two elections in this district closely, but from what I do know, I think the level of candidate sophistication and candidate quality can vary quite a bit. It's a large district, and so some candidates have an extensive amount of organized support behind them and money to go along with it, and others, run basically shoestring campaigns. So we really don't know how much of these results were a reflection of racial issues versus if a candidate raised $30,000 or $20,000 and another candidate spent $200, I mean, that can make a huge difference. So I'm kind of curious if you have any thoughts on that issue and whether that should, impact how we look at this data and how much, weight we give it. And then also, since we're moving ahead next week toward adopting a preliminary plan, obviously all the maps you've drawn for us have their pros and cons, and they're all, demographically representative and meet the requirements of the Voting Rights Act. So I'm just curious, what would you suggest we weigh in terms of looking at the pros and cons of the different maps? What should we, as we review these maps over the next week, and move toward adopting one of them in a preliminary fashion, what kind of things should we be thinking about as we compare the maps?
That's a great question. And in terms of the racially polarized voting analysis, no, it doesn't take into account candidate quality. That's a whole nother kind of academic study. I do tons of racially polarized voting analysis across the US every day. And this is not extreme by any means relative to what I see many times. Okay, so I think that's positive in a way. And having racially polarized voting is not necessarily a bad thing, in the sense that candidates are often appealing to their base racial group to begin with, because that's who they may live around, or there's a lot of research in race and ethnic politics shows that. And so it's just something I wanted to provide to the commissioners, kind of getting at Scott Raftery's point. Why we're looking at it now, it's not necessarily a kind of a litigant perspective or a culpability perspective, but it's just for the commissioners so they can see the degree of how this is playing out. I think it's good to know that there's likely some of this going on based on the evidence. And then the factors that, I think me personally as a demographer, I would be comfortable with any of these maps. And, but I think that kind of like, given that the litigation is coming from, I think a Hispanic community plaintiff, that seems to be pretty important in making sure that those numbers in one of the districts at least look strong. And then the compacted measures are mostly pretty good. You may want to think a little bit at least about the shape of the areas. And so some of the maps kind of come around, and while it's fine, it's just that the shape sometimes just visually looks a little off. And so those are some minor adjustments that can be made. I have started to look at the attendance zone maps. That's taking me a little longer. Those will be kind of coming due. So there'll be like reports looking at, for each different map, how many school district or how many attendance zones are cut across the different lines. I was just kind of looking at this earlier today, and it's pretty good as is, but that would be secondary, in my view, to the demographic side of the districts. And so I think the key for me and what's so appealing about this district, this area is, and then thinking about demographics moving forward, how is that going to play out? And that's a very difficult fully question to answer. I've been kind of hesitant to answer that fully. Just I tried to provide some evidence for you all to think about that. And then, but you may think, well, how is this going to change politics or change representation for different communities in these areas? You know, and then over in 5 years and 6 years and 7 years. You may also want to think about, and I haven't done an analysis on this, but you can look at publicly available information. What does voter turnout look like in these different areas? And so you may be able to draw a high CVAP for a particular group, but if turnout is very low, then those candidates are not necessarily getting themselves elected, or their particular, the voters are not able to elect the candidates of choice in those areas. So those are the kinds of things that I would sort of advise in this particular case. We're not talking about split counties. We don't have to deal with that. The city boundaries is something that does matter, but I think is lower down the list than some of these other concerns, especially given it's about school board here. It's not about, you know, the city side of things. So, and we've had to kind of cut those up a little bit to account for making sure that we have enough, you know, demographic representation in different areas. The other thing to think about is population deviation and potential projected population imbalance over time. So for the most part, most of these maps are keeping a net deviation, I think, of under 5%, so negative 2.5 to plus 2.5. And if the commissioners are very interested in, sometimes you work in spaces, and I don't think this is one, and I'm not recommending this, but sometimes if you're looking to kind of make sure that a particular group is able to elect the candidate of choice, you might work with that deviation more to get it closer to 10%. But that's more, I don't like doing that. I don't personally, we don't need to deal with that, but that's something that could be considered. You might say, let's take the map with the lowest possible deviation. And I think I used Montana as an example. I was working up in Montana, and the proposed maps I had seen from the state for the 2 congressional districts, because they got a new congressional district, there was 1 person difference. You know, I mean, it's just like they had it down to a science, you know. And we're pretty good here, but each person, each one of the commissioners, I think, is going to consider different inputs and outputs. And I do think that that's why it's so great what you're doing, because you all have different priorities. And then that's the point of the deliberative process, is each of you taking those. And what I would advise is kind of the things that I've ticked off, put that down into a little matrix and kind of play with that a little bit, and see which one is more on this side or that side, if there's any variability or if it doesn't really matter. And then you kind of move to some other considerations. Sorry for the long-winded academic
No,
response.
that's very helpful. Thanks, because that's what I was looking for, is just some guideposts, you know, to look at in terms of weighing the maps, because the maps are all solid maps. And so trying to figure out which is the best map for the community is going to be a bit of a challenge. And one thing I'll just add, and I don't know that there's anything that any of these maps would particularly speak to on this, is for me, in terms of something I'm thinking about, is beyond the issue of making sure the map we agree to is demographically representative and it's fair to different communities of interest, is to have a map that gives candidates the best chance to run, the candidates from a cross section of experiences and backgrounds to run strong campaigns in a grassroots fashion without having to rely on, significant fundraising, because there has been significant interest group money that's flowed into these elections from different sides. And I think that's something that just personally concerns me when there's a lot of organized interest group money influencing campaigns. And if there's a way to give grassroots candidates who are maybe not going to be able to raise a ton of money, but are enmeshed in the community, immersed in the community, know the schools, know the people, give them a chance to run a strong campaign and be competitive. That's something I would like to think about. And I'm not sure if that's something that, if there's any metrics within these maps that would speak to that ability, if that makes sense, or if that's something that's kind of just an unknown.
That's a tough one to answer. I mean, I haven't seen any sort of measures on that specific thing. I mean, you could, compactness kind of gets at that. If it's a super tight, then people can walk the area or they could drive, door to door fairly easily. And if you're putting like one community, you're wrapping around and you're building and grabbing another community a little bit, those communities demographically may look similar, but from an organizational standpoint, they may not have that connectivity as much, and that could potentially make it harder to campaign in those areas. Especially this area. I mean, it's probably not that easy to get around, and during high traffic time, right? It's a very populated space, and everyone knows the 580 and the 80 is not the best place to spend the afternoon. And so that's definitely happened to me a few times, so I can relate. And so that is something that could potentially matter. But again, sometimes you have to draw lines across a highway, even though you don't want to, because of these other requirements. But in general, that kind of limitation, as you're talking about, in terms of interest group money versus on the ground mobilization, that's endemic to politics. I think everywhere I go, everywhere I study, you see that, and you do see these kind of grassroots campaigns emerge, like a Latina candidate coming out of the Central Valley or something like that, and they come from a very strong organizational tradition. And I'm not sure about this area whether they have that. Sometimes it's harder to organize in certain economic and city-like environments because of a variety of reasons. So that might be the case here, and one reason why you may see turnout effects going on. I can only kind of speculate.
Right. Okay, that's great. And that might just give us some food for thought and some things to discuss next week. So thanks for laying out your thoughts on that. Appreciate it.
Great, and thank you for that very interesting exchange. That was quite informative. Thank you. I do not have any reports for this evening, so we'll move on to item 8, which is future meetings. Our next meeting has been talked about quite often tonight. It is next Tuesday, December 14th. That is where we will be looking at the preliminary maps, and we hope that we will get further input from the community at that time. And is there any other input that you want to add for this evening, Mr. Pitts? No. Seeing none.
No, I will just say that we took to heart the comments from Commissioner Lazzaretti, and we will work with the chair and Dr. Collingwood over the next week to make sure that we can present the options to the commission next week in a way that lays out the various decision points and factors that can be considered, and so that the public and the commission members can understand, have the best possible understanding of how to reach a decision on a preliminary plan, with the understanding that this plan will be preliminary and subject to further revision based on subsequent input and feedback.
We will have 3 meetings where people can continue to give input on the preliminary maps. So we will continue to gather public input. And I do see that there is a comment from Commissioner Hilliard.
Really quickly, just one question is, when will the commission be voting? Like, do we have a timeline for when the members of the commission will be able to speak to their preference of the preliminary plans? Is that something that happens in 2022 after we've gotten more?
So I mean, I think that the commission, the schedule is for the commission to adopt a preliminary plan at next Tuesday's meeting.
Okay.
So we'll, as I say, I will work with the chair and the vice chair and our demographer to try to come up with the best possible way to make that as clear and in terms of what we're deciding and how to make that decision as possible, while providing plenty of space for any changes that are identified and the options that already exist. And again, with the understanding that this will be a preliminary plan that will provide the basis for a subsequent set of public outreach meetings prior to the adoption of the recommended plan, which will happen on, the plan is January 25th.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And seeing that we have come to the end of our agenda, if there is no further business of the commission, then I will move on to item 9, which is adjournment. And we will be adjourning at 7:36 this evening. And again, thank you everyone for attending. We really appreciate and want to hear for public input. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Good night.